So, in the fight against online disinformation, one of the biggest challenges isn't just finding the threats, it's figuring out how to talk about them. I mean, if analysts all over the world can't even use the same language to describe what they're seeing, how can they possibly fight back together? Let's get into it.
Right. This is the core of the problem. Think about it like trying to build a global fire department, but every single firefighter uses a different word for fire, hose, and ladder. It would be total chaos. And in the world of information threats, that kind of inconsistency is just as dangerous. Okay, before we go any further, let's make sure we're on the same page with a key term here, FIMI. That's Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference. Now, we're not just talking about a single fake post. No, this is a whole pattern of behavior, a campaign that's specifically designed to cause real-world harm to things like democratic processes. So the question is, how do you even begin to track and catalog something that complex? Well, the first big step was to try and create that common language. The goal was to build a kind of disinformation dictionary that everyone everywhere could use. And this massive effort led to the creation of a system called the DISARM framework. So the whole point here was to build a shared taxonomy. You can think of it like the classification system for biology, kingdom, phylum, class, but for disinformation techniques. The dream was that an analyst in Brussels and an analyst in Taipei could see the exact same hostile activity and label it with the exact same term. So the original framework was built as a kill chain, which is a concept they borrowed from the world of cybersecurity. It basically lays out a threat as this neat, linear sequence of steps. You plan it, you create the content, you set up your assets, and then you execute. Seems pretty logical, right? But as we all know, theory and reality are often two very different things. And that's exactly what happened here. The moment analysts out in the field actually started using this framework, the feedback started pouring in. And you know what? It revealed some really deep-seated problems with that initial design. Now, this is what's so fascinating. This slide shows the fundamental conflict they ran into. On one side, you had users saying, "Whoa, this is way too complicated. We need fewer, simpler terms." But on the other side, you had users saying, "This isn't nearly detailed enough. We need more specific, more granular terms to describe what we're actually seeing." So how on earth do you solve for both of those things at the same time? And this quote just hits the nail on the head. In the real world, disinformation campaigns aren't these neat, linear things. An adversary might be planning a totally new narrative while they're still executing an old one. Things happen in parallel, they loop back on themselves. Real-world analysis just isn't a straight line. So as the team tried to patch up the framework, they learned some pretty valuable lessons, the hard way. Turns out just adding more terms made the whole thing impossible to navigate. Changing definitions? Well, that broke all the old reports that used them. And taking away some of the broad, general terms that people were actually using to make sense of things, that just frustrated everybody. It became crystal clear that small fixes just weren't going to cut it. They needed to rethink the entire thing. And this brings us to the real turning point in the story. The decision to basically scrap the old model and rebuild the entire framework from the ground up. This was the breakthrough that led to DISARM 2.0. They realized that to solve that core conflict, that push and pull between simplicity and detail, they couldn't just rearrange the old pieces of the puzzle. They needed a totally new way of looking at the problem. And the analogy they came up with is just perfect. Think about a supermarket. It can have tens of thousands of different items, but you can usually find what you need pretty easily, right? That's because it's organized into a logical system: produce, dairy, bakery, and so on. You know which aisle to go to. So the question became, could they build a similar system for FIMI techniques? And here it is. This was the absolute game changer. The big idea was to completely separate the objective facts from the subjective analysis. In other words, split up what you can definitively see an actor doing versus what you think their motivation or their goal is. This one simple idea solved the central problem. So the seeing part became this new observation framework. And instead of a rigid, linear kill chain, it's a simple, elegant matrix: asset, action, and content. The things that actors use, the verbs they perform with those things, and the nouns, the information they share. It's incredibly intuitive. It's like you can finally walk right to the aisle you need without getting lost. And this is where the magic really happens. By combining these simple, objective little building blocks, analysts can now describe incredibly complex behaviors. So for example, you combine the observation of a post with an impersonated persona and some news content, and boom, You've created a procedure that precisely describes a fake news article that's been falsely attributed to a real journalist. It's both simple and unbelievably detailed. So you might be wondering, what happened to the thinking part? All that important strategic analysis? Well, that now lives in its own separate assessment framework. This is a space where analysts can use their expertise to connect those objective observations to the bigger picture, documenting things like motivation, targets, and strategic goals, all without muddying the waters of the factual evidence. And this new, clean structure isn't just some theoretical models sitting on a shelf. Oh no. It is the foundation for a whole new generation of smarter, faster tools that can help analysts defend the information space. Now, you don't have to be an engineer to get the main point of this slide, because the data is now so well structured. Just like that organized supermarket, it becomes the perfect foundation to build really powerful technologies, like AI-assisted analysis, right on top of it. And that's already leading to a much better toolkit. We're talking about things like a secure add-in for Microsoft Word that helps analysts tag reports as they write them, an AI tool that can suggest relevant tags to speed up their work, and even proposals to improve the technical standards so that this kind of FIMI intelligence can be shared between organizations just as easily as cybersecurity data is today. And it all fits together into this comprehensive new workflow for analysts. It takes them all the way from the initial identification of a threat, through that technical analysis and strategic assessment we've talked about, all the way to understanding the impact and planning a response. This quote just captures the whole point perfectly. It all comes back to that initial problem. This new framework improves inter-annotator consistency, which is just a fancy way of saying it makes sure everyone is finally speaking the same language. And that enables a global community to finally work together faster and way more effectively than ever before. So why does all this matter? Well, it's the story of moving from a messy, chaotic process where everyone was describing threats differently to building a shared, structured, and scalable defense. It's really about creating clarity in the face of absolute chaos. This whole journey really leaves us with a pretty critical question for the future. For years, the biggest challenge was just describing the threat. So now that a common language finally exists, can we take the next step? Can we build a stronger, faster, and maybe even an automated defense against these constantly evolving threats? That's all for this explainer. Thanks so much for joining us.